In this episode of Children of Heroes, we travelled about 2 hours west from London to Leamington Spa, where we interviewed Mr. John Berkeley, son of Private First Class Jakub Berkovič.
Thank you for participating in our project Children of Heroes.
I'm very proud to.
Your father served in the Czechoslovak army in the United Kingdom during the Second World War.
Yes, with the 2nd Infantry Battalion.
Mm-hmm. And could you tell us more about him?
He was born, I think, 1910 or 1911, so before Czechoslovakia came into existence. Born and lived in a town called Hust in it's now in Ukraine. I never met him. My mother told me that he had to return to Czechoslovakia to be released from the army, and he never came back. So this was after the war was over. I grew up in a house with my mother and my grandmother, and I always sensed that there was some, I'm not quite sure what the word is, but we didn't talk about my father. His name wasn't mentioned. Even now, age 78, I can hear my grandmother saying, if I'd done something to annoy her or something she thought was not good, she would say something like, "We don't want you growing up like your father." I mean, it was a happy childhood, but the subject of my father was clearly a sensitive one. People in Britain wouldn't have known anything about, or very much about, Czechoslovakia then. And certainly no other house we lived in South London would have had lots and lots of little books about Czechoslovakia. I mean, there were other things. There was this, which interested me more, being a boy. It's a 2-inch mortar round. If you twist it to separate it from the marble base, it's a cigarette lighter. Things like that he'd obviously left were there to be seen. There were various badges and things, which, boys love badges. I've got several of those. And the badge that I've got pinned to my jacket, which I only ever wear at the fountain ceremonies. Your
father came to England via Palestine and France, is that correct?
Yes. He was a cantor. So he sung the hymn in the synagogue, and he was married to a lady called Malka. He had, before the war, 3 children. That sort of discovery was when I seriously started, researching. I was 50, 28 years ago, when I sat down with my mother for the very first time and said, "I want us to have a conversation about my father." And she told me everything that she knew. My father could see the way that things were going, was very worried. He decided that he should try and get to Palestine. Soon after he arrived in Palestine, he travelled to Jerusalem, went to the Czech consul and was given, and I've got a copy of the piece of paper which said he was a Czech citizen. And the only reason he would have wanted to get that would be to be able to join the Czech armed forces. I don't know how he got from Palestine to Aj. He arrived at Aj, and General Weygand had given orders they should join the fight up at in the north of France, that campaign, which was a disaster, really, not because of the Czechs, but they had very little equipment. Hardly any of them had the same uniforms. They eventually retreated, fighting their way down through France. And then the Member of Parliament for Leamington and Warwick got to hear about this. I can't remember how many thousand there were stuck in France. And he went to Churchill and he said that something should be done. They should be rescued and brought to Britain. So eventually he came on a ship via Gibraltar, arrived in Liverpool, then they were taken to Cholmondeley Castle. And one day he took a train to city of Chester, and there he met an Englishwoman, my mother, who spoke fluent German. She travelled a lot. That was the language in which my father and my mother would communicate. She was a civil servant, worked for the Ministry of Food, and they would arrange to meet. They were together on VE Day, when in London everyone gathered at Piccadilly Circus. She would have been heavily pregnant, and it's my father's name on my birth certificate. I don't think my mother would ever have come to Walton Hall. I'm very fortunate. I have got every one of her diaries from the age of 11, which is fantastic. There's really no direct connection with Walton Hall, except that that's where my father would have been at the time. The problem that I had later in tracing the family, in finding out more, was that the name that she knew, my father's name, Berkovič, was his mother's surname. So I can remember we went to Prague and went to one of the churches where there were lots of names painted on walls. Of course, I was looking for the wrong name. And it was only much later when I managed to get his records from the Central Military Archive. Suddenly, I discovered that his name should be Gluck. And that enabled me to really start searching for his brothers and sisters, others who may have survived.
Unlike your father's brother, your father didn't join the Allied forces after the landing in Europe. What's the reason for that?
I don't know the reason. I've tried to find the reason. He told my mother in a letter that there were just 5 of them left. Why there is so little information about what he was actually doing. At one point, he was at another big house in Cambridgeshire, which was mainly SOE, Special Operations Executive. What he was doing there, I have no idea, and have no way of finding out.
What did your father do after the war?
That's a very good question, and I don't think I can give you an answer. I don't know when he left Britain. I'm not sure when he reached Palestine again. I think he would have had to have gone there to find out which, if any, of his family was still alive. In particular, his wife and 3 children. A large proportion of the family perished at Auschwitz. When I went back to Rust the second time, almost a sort of pilgrimage, I went to try to find family graves. I did find one. I knew when the train to Auschwitz had left Rust, there was a railway yard at a brickworks just outside of the town. So I went there. I could see the railway line. I found this very emotional, and I felt I had take something, even if it's only for our grandchildren. That's a railway spike holding the rail in place. I took various things to Auschwitz and put them on what's called the ramp. In other words, where the trains came and everyone was turned out. So I just felt I wanted some connection. The number of his family who survived was most unusual. That German name of Glück, they were very lucky. Not so much the older ones and the children, which is terrible, but most of his brothers and sisters survived. My father died in 1971. It was sometime after that I found the rest of the family. Suddenly, their brother's child appearing, from nowhere and knowing nothing about me or about what had happened in Britain. Still can't really believe it. I've obviously asked the surviving brothers and sisters for information. One of them, his eldest brother, Joseph, also made it to Palestine. The British were in charge at that time, and instead of welcoming him with open arms, they promptly put him and a lot of other Czechs and Slovaks on a ship to Mauritius and put them in an ancient Napoleonic period French prison. Awful place. And he was there for, must have been 2 or 3 years. And then finally, they allowed him to go by ship to Britain. And it was then, I suppose 1944, that he was able to join the Free Czech Army. And because Joseph was my father's closest sibling, my appearance out of nowhere, I think, meant a lot to him. We used to talk on the phone. He's a lovely, lovely man.
You wrote a book about the history of your family. Could you show a book?
See, I felt that our children's generation wouldn't know all of this. They'd know little bits from their particular bit of the family, but not the whole lot. Whereas I'd put the whole story together. There were many, many, many more photos that I've got in there than 99% of Jewish families. Fortunately, 2 of the brothers were very keen on photography. I was contacted recently by an organisation in Budapest, and they said, "You've got more pictures of Jews, both male and female, wearing their yellow stars than we've got."
You yourself, you choose to work in human resources. What led you to this career?
I had a flying accident. I'm mad on aeroplanes. After I'd taken the first of my school examinations at 16 and fractured my spine and never went back to school. The advice was just get a job. I went to an occupational guidance unit, and they asked me lots of questions and then said to me, "Have you ever thought of nursing?" To a 16-year-old boy, that came as rather a surprising question. And I said, "No, I'll be honest with you, I've never thought of nursing." So I started training as a nurse in the local psychiatric hospital, and loved it. Michelle's uncle had an engineering business in Birmingham, and said, would I like to work there as their first personnel officer. That was my career for quite a long time. And then later, because I'd been very much involved with young people training, apprenticeships, that sort of thing, I ran several government programs and was given a senior research fellowship at Warwick University to do more research on how best to give young people the skills that they needed and that the country needed.
You received the Order of the British Empire for your work?
That was for services to young people, young people, training of young people, something like that. Yeah. I think I would go back to those words of Neville Chamberlain. He described what was happening before the war as a quarrel between people of whom we know nothing. I give talks to groups, and most people in this country know absolutely nothing about Eastern Europe and Central Europe. I think that's very, very sad. And so I'm keen to I don't mean teach people, but let people know that this great body of men came here to, if you like, to help us, but also to rescue their country. And it is still very little known.